Hey there, I've got a really basic scene and setup that mimics the illusion of passing a UV light over something that can only be seen when under UV light. So here we go. Really simple. You can see that as we're rotating the spotlight, as it hits the handprint, it illuminates it, and as it rotates away from it, it hides it. So this is really simple. You can see here only three items: floor, handprint, spotlight. And basically the only thing that we're considering here to create this illusion is the Z rotation of the spotlight. So this illusion can obviously break if we move the light, which we don't want, and if we have additional handprints. Again, the only thing that it's factoring for is the Z rotation there. So may or may not actually be what you want, but if all you're doing is trying to create this illusion, it might well work for something like a cutscene, for example. So let me show you how this is actually done. So let me select the handprint. You can see here, it's a very simple shader setup. We have a texture here, which is basically just a white handprint on a black background. And that's being fed into a mix shader, which is mixing between, if I show you this, it creates the handprint. And basically what it's doing is it's saying where it's white, we want it to be the emission texture or the emission shader here, which has a green color and a strength of 1. Otherwise, where it's black, we want it to be completely transparent. And then we're feeding that mix shader into another mix shader, which I've renamed driver. And that is basically blending between completely invisible and the green handprint that we've derived from the previous mix shader. And then we have a driver that is being placed on the factor of that mix, so between completely invisible and visible. Now this is a really simple setup. Let me show you how it works without the driver real quick. So again, let's do this. All right. And you can see here, as I move it towards 0, it's going to fade away. And as I move it towards 1, it's going to reveal itself. Very simple. So let me get rid of that, reset this back up. All right, so now if I were to show you what this driver does, obviously for you, you're going to right click and say add driver. I'm going to edit the driver I've already added. Now, unfortunately, these windows are a little annoying. If I move my mouse off, it's going to disappear. So I'll try to keep it there and explain what's going on. So we have a simple scripted expression where we're considering a simple variable and doing some basic multiplication, division, and exponential functions to it. And so basically we have var here, which represents var there. You can name this whatever you want, just make sure it's consistent, otherwise the expression will break. So this var that we're deriving here is based on our spotlight, and it's looking at the Z rotation of our spotlight in world space. So our current Z rotation is 0. Now, the way that we want to think about this is when our spotlight is rotated at 0 degrees, we want a value of 1 so that we can see the handprint. As it rotates away from 0 degrees, so either negative or positive, whatever it may be, as it moves away from 0, we want it to fade. And so that's what we're basically doing with this expression. We're taking the rotation degrees of the spotlight here in the z-axis only, and we're raising it to the power of 2, which makes sure that it's never negative. And then we're multiplying that by negative 15, which is basically the wideness or narrowness of our bell curve. So if you think about a bell curve as we rotate away from the center of it, which would be 0 degrees, it's going to go low, it's going to become 0, it's going to fade away. And so we're multiplying that by negative 15, which is an arbitrary value that represents the narrowness of the bell curve. So if we made this negative 45, we're going to have to rotate much closer to 0 before the handprint starts showing up. And if we do a lower value, it'll be less. So I can show you that real quickly just so you get a visual example. I'm a very visual person. I'm an artist. More so than a mathematician. ChatGPT actually came up with this expression. I happen to understand it, so I'll do my best to explain it. So if we put negative 5 instead of negative 15 and just move this away, you can see here it creates the problem where the handprint is still illuminated even though the light's not touching it. So the way that we can account for that is we can either increase our spotlight size to something like 80 degrees, for example, where when we rotate away, as it moves off, it fades away, and as we move closer, it fades on. Or we can set this back down to 45. Let's say we're happy with that. And then we just change this expression to, oops, let's make sure we select this. See, that's that annoying thing I mentioned before. There we go. Select that, edit driver, and change this to 15, right? And then if we wanted our spotlight to be even more narrow for some reason, let's say smaller, then obviously we would want to make that value more negative. So like maybe negative 45 or some other value. But I think the way that it is now works relatively well. Again, I keep forgetting to select that. And let's go over here. There we go. All right. So now that we've figured this out, we can explain the rest of it. So essentially all of that math is happening inside of this exp function, which I believe is an exponent. I'm not entirely sure. But basically what that does is it maps the value between 0 and 1, because that's the range that we want to operate in for the slider for our driver mix shader, essentially. So this will do what you've seen. Again, I'm not a mathematician. I'm more of an artist, so I don't completely understand all of it. But I understand the parts of it that make the illusion work the way I want it to, and hopefully you do now too. So hopefully that's helpful. But again, this will break. If we wanted to make it more realistic, where we actually consider whether or not the light itself is pointing, I guess we could use drivers, and we could go through and say when it reaches close to this transformation value on the location and the rotation, then we want to reveal it. But that's kind of tedious and would be a lot to keep track of in drivers. So probably the easier way to do that would be to create a shader setup that actually accounts for the attributes of the spotlight, and then to manipulate the shader's values based on those attributes. That gets a little bit over my head, but it definitely would be more robust in creating that illusion. And I will see if I can figure out how to do that without spending too much time. But hopefully this will at least give you an insight into how very simple drivers work in creating this particular illusion. Just keep in mind, again, it will break in certain ways. So hopefully that was helpful, and we'll talk to you later. Take care.